Hello, VUBers. In this presentation, we're going to be covering the 5 different introduction types. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I hope that you find this helpful. Get right into it. So typically we talk about 5 types of introductions that we have to choose from when we're thinking of writing an essay, and we'll go through these. The first one is called the funnel, and I'll explain it and tell you never to use it in my class. We'll talk about why. The next one is called turnabout, often referred to as contrast introduction. There's the quote introduction, the dramatic introduction, and then anecdotal, and this is where you tell a short story. So the first one is what we call the funnel. And what you're going to do basically is lead your reader step by step, typically through some sort of history of the topic, going from general to specific, or a little more vague to specific, up until your thesis statement. And you want to avoid this one for most of your classes in writing in college. This is best reserved for something that's a very technical topic. Um, you want to write something about some new angle on the theory of relativity. So you may start by, reviewing Einstein and relativity, and then leading into your thesis. um, or if you want to write a paper for a history class and you want to really examine a recent Supreme Court ruling on a topic, then your introduction might be a great place to talk about a ruling on this topic in, the 1920s and then the 1960s. Now, that would be a funnel and that would be an appropriate time to use it. But when we're doing argumentative writing, which is the vast majority of your writing in college and especially in your writing courses, really just boring. And the risk that the first year students run in writing a funnel is to have some sort of first sentence that says, since the beginning of time, people have argued about whether or not the death penalty should be legal, and the first thing I'll do is just say, scratch that. That's not even true. It's way too broad of a beginning, and it just doesn't help you write an essay. So the funnel, save that for a technical science essay or a specific history essay. Put that in your back pocket and lock it. All right, so the turnabout introduction. This can be very interesting and exciting. You're basically leading your reader to believe that you might be writing the essay about one topic and then sort of flipping it a 180 by your thesis statement at the end. So if we, have this example of someone starting an essay, it seems as though they're going to write about the benefits, educational benefits of television. And by the time we get to the end, we have this contrast thesis statement that says, despite all this, I argue that watching TV is a waste of time because the education and motivation gained from engaging in real life activities are far greater than anyone could gain from watching TV. Excuse my allergies. What's nice about the turnabout introduction is that it sets you up to rebut counter arguments from the beginning. And so counter arguments are something that we will always address in an argumentative essay. And if you know that you have a lot of them, or if you know that you're facing what we call a hostile audience, so an audience that is not going to be very receptive to your argument, then by using the turnabout, you're acknowledging all of their very valid counter arguments, and you're going to rebut those first or sequentially, however you decide to do it. But it is nice, something to consider when you are talking to or writing to an audience who may not see your point of view very readily. So, a great introduction to consider using. The quote introduction is basically just as it says. You're going to start this essay by directly quoting someone. Sometimes paraphrasing someone is okay, but if you're going to do that, just make sure you're always citing your source, whether you're quoting or paraphrasing. And the more specific the quote and citation, the better, right? Instead of that sort of, somebody once said that a journey of, I don't know, 1,000 footsteps or whatever begins with a step. It's better to have a really specific quote that you can attribute to someone historically, and then you don't forget to go and refer back to that by the time you get to your conclusion, right? So we've got this, maybe you're writing an introduction to an argument against the death penalty. So you could start with this quote from Albaron Waugh: judicial execution can never cancel or remove the atrocity it seeks to punish. It can only add a second atrocity to the original one. And so that moves you straight into your topic of capital punishment and your argument against it. It's going to be quite obvious. And so I really am a big fan of the quote introduction because it shows your reader your topic. They can see this famous person saying this. It gives them pause to reflect on the topic, and then it's just so smooth and easy to transition into your own thesis statement. So you can read this on your own time, have an example of how you would move into that argumentative thesis statement while also addressing some counter arguments along the way. The dramatic introduction is something that a lot of students really like to use, and you'll see this a lot in journalism. So it works in academic writing and in journalism writing. Um, what you're doing is presenting the reader with something surprising, a surprising statistic, or some shocking piece of data. Just make sure, again, that you're citing your source. These are often introductions using specific numbers and figures, and you need to support, where you got that information. So, you might want to write something, a lesson about what you learned from your own imprisonment or something like that. If your teacher allows you to write that personal type of essay, and maybe you could start off by explaining that the US houses 1/4 of the world's population within its prisons alone, right? And a lot of people are shocked to hear that, but it's true. We are sort of notorious for imprisoning people, and sometimes imprisoning people who are not a danger to themselves or society, in the traditional sense, right? That sort of like white collar crime, or addicts, right? Who, yeah, in a way they are hurting themselves, but maybe could benefit from treatment more than being locked up. And so we're known for, hey, you did something wrong, hey, go to prison, right? And so people are shocked by this statistic. I didn't cite it. I need to find the citation, and I would expect you to have it there at the end of that sentence if you're going to use something like that. Just an example there. Anecdotal. This introduction is often called the scenario introduction, because it's anecdotal if you tell a personal story or if you recapitulate the story of someone else. It's just called scenario if you do that hypothetical introduction of, imagine you lived here and did this, and et cetera, et cetera. I tell my students not to do that, and you'll see why at the end, because you're not allowed to use the word you in the essays that you write for me. So I really just stick with anecdotal. So if you're going to tell a story, make sure it's relevant and it doesn't become too long. The problem with this is some students get so invested in telling their personal story that their introduction now is 3 paragraphs long and their whole essay is only going to be a couple pages. So you do the math on that, right? What I highly recommend is summarizing somebody else's story. So if you want to argue that young people need to be more cautious with this pandemic, then maybe you could tell the story of this guy who licked a public toilet seat as a part of a challenge and got himself hospitalized with COVID. He was 21. And so, a story like this just again shows the reader wow, like, is this really what some young people are doing? Are they really that crazy? Um, the challenge, though, is also bring it back up in your conclusion. So we don't ever use any of these things as a means to an end. If you're going to mention a statistic in the introduction, go back to it in the conclusion. Always try to return to, if you used a quote, return back to that quote or back to that person who was saying the quote, something like that, to give us a sense of closure, and not that you just threw this at us in the beginning just to grab our attention. So now it is your turn to try to identify the type of introduction based upon its first sentence. When I was young, I thought hospitals were scary places. Harvard scholars estimate that 70 to 99% of COVID-19 related deaths in the US could have been prevented by stronger interventions taken during April. I value my freedom of expression and my country's commitment to democracy, but sometimes the government needs to protect its citizens, even if it means limiting some freedoms during a crisis. So you think through these. In this first one, we've got a short story. It's a personal short story. In the second example, we've got a piece of shocking data, and it's cited. In this third one, we've got a lot of contrast, right? We feel as though we're going towards this essay about freedom and democracy, and then by the end, we're actually going towards an argument of limiting freedoms under certain circumstances. So hopefully, you were thinking that this first one is an anecdote, the second one is called a dramatic introduction, and the third one is called a turnabout. Some tips of what you do not want to do for your essay and writing your introduction. Make sure you don't write the following. The purpose of this essay is to, right? This is something that's just really irksome. If I want to argue that the US should, I don't know, get more aggressive in its capital punishment, then I don't need to say the purpose of the essay is to convince the reader that the U.S. should, ramp up its killing rate of those on death row. No, 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 no. I could just have a sentence that says something to the effect of the US should become more aggressive in imposing the death penalty upon people who are already on death row, right? Um, Again, I've decided to write my essay about. You don't need that. Is your essay about the decision making process of writing your essay, or is your essay about some specific argument, right? So we don't say, I've decided to write my essay about in the actual essay. You could do that in a draft, you could do that when you're brainstorming, but later on you go and you edit that out. So don't refer to your essay in your essay at all, right? And sometimes students do that when they say, as I mentioned before. If you mentioned it once and you did a good job of mentioning it, you don't need to mention it again. Uh, Students really undermine their authority when they say, I'm not sure if I know about this essay topic, yada, yada, yada. We know that you're not experts, right? So if you're writing something about, greenhouse gas emissions by semi trucks, we know that all you've got to go on is some research that you did that's based upon other people's research, right? Your students, right? So that's fine. We know you're not experts. And you know what? Most experts aren't even experts. But we don't try to undermine our own authority in this way. You try to do the best research you can and present the best argument that you can. And so just write it, and just show me your argument. You don't need to refer to the process of the writing or refer to something that you said before. And so we'll practice, seeing what that looks like as I see your own writing, and I help you begin to edit it. For conclusions, I'm really looking forward to seeing your introductions. I sincerely hope that you choose to use a dramatic introduction, a turnabout introduction, or a quote introduction. I think those are the three strongest ones to go to. I think the anecdote can be done tastefully, but it's a little more difficult. And the funnel just ends up being so boring that I really want to convince you to avoid using that introduction. So I hope this was helpful. I look forward to seeing you in class, and reach out to me with any questions or concerns that you have. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.